So we have seen how words become numbers and how numbers become vectors, which are called input embeddings. But embeddings are just the start. The key to transformers is how they handle sequential information, and that brings us to positional encoding. Previous models like RNAs and LSTMs process the sequential information step by step. That is, they receive a sentence and the model processes the sentence word by word, and that would help the model keep the order of the sentence. For example, if the sentence was "red roses mean love," the models would process the sentence like "red roses mean love." As we can see, the model receives and processes the sentence word by word and keeps the order of the words in the sentence. That was the previous models. Transformers, on the other hand, do not process sequences step by step. Instead, transformers process the input all at once, in parallel. So, to retain the order of the sequence, transformers use something called positional encoding. This positional encoding is basically a number that is added to the input embeddings that we saw in our previous section. The objective is to provide the model with information about the position of each individual word, actually each individual token in the sequence. Here we can see how both the encoder and the decoder have positional encoding added to the input embedding. When the encoder receives the input and converts that into input embedding, then we add that to the positional encoding. We go through the encoder and we pass it to the decoder. And again, in the decoder, we also have the input of the decoder. We put it as an embedding and we add the positional embedding. All this information will go all the way through the decoder and come down to the output of the decoder, and that's a cycle that will finish when the model completes the text that it will be generating. The original transformer used a specific mathematical function involving sines and cosines for these encodings, ensuring each position had a unique encoding. But there is another way to come up with this positional information, and it is called the positional embedding. The positional encoding is fixed because it comes from a deterministic function, a predefined function that uses sines and cosines usually. And as shared, the original transformer was created using this positional encoding. But then we have the positional embedding. In the case of the positional embedding, the position is learned through training. It is adaptive because it allows the model to adaptively learn the representation of tokens positions. And it's flexible because it can potentially capture more complex positional relationships learned from the data. Most model transformers use positional embedding. Whether we use positional encoding or positional embedding, the next step is to add this positional information to the input embeddings. So we have again our tokens that are transformed into token IDs. Each token ID is transformed or linked to its vector embedding. So we have now the input embeddings. And as we saw before, we add the positional encoding to the input embeddings. And it's just that addition. And after we add it, we have an embedding matrix or an input embedding. Before we move on, let's see how we can implement positional encoding in PyTorch. It's basically a class that we will call positional encoding that inherits from the NN module. In the init function, we will pass the maximum number of tokens and the dimension of the embeddings. We can also pass a dropout rate so that we can implement a function to avoid overfitting. We define the dropout and other matrices and variables to calculate the positional embedding. Remember, this one is based in sine and cosine. In the forward pass, we receive the input embeddings and we add it to the positional embedding matrix defined in this init function. And we return it with a dropout. If we wanted to do positional embeddings, it is much simpler. We instantiate the embedding from PyTorch, passing again the same parameters, max tokens and the embeddings dimension, and that's it. This will be learned while the model is being trained, while in the previous case, these are fixed